Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking a look at the BIOS on the Asrock B550m Pro 4. Lots of excitement. I'm only kidding, there isn't really much excitement in here, but if you're looking for some of the key things such as how to enable XMP, precision boost overdrive, enable or disable onboard audio, USB, RGBs, all that kind of stuff, then yeah, you probably want to pay attention. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So on the screen here, this is the first screen you'll see, and we are currently on version P2.10, which appears to be the very latest one at present, which is the beginning of January 2023. And we currently have installed our Ryzen 5 4500 6-core processor, and we've got 16 gigs of RAM, 2x8 gig DDR4 3200. So yeah, basically tells you kind of what is going on. On the right hand side here we have a description box, so if you click on something in one side which is got options, then it will give you a description of it, and also at the bottom you've got option for changing language, so you can choose between various languages here, and also you can set your time and date, etc. should you wish to. And there isn't a kind of an advanced or an easy mode, it is basically all the same thing. There is a QR code there so you can get details on that also. At the top we've got main, OC tweaker, advanced tool, hardware monitor, security, boot and exit. When you're done at the end you do exit and you get the option to save and changes, but we'll take a look at that when we get to that point. So let's start off with the first one of our tabs, which is OC tweaker. So this is your basic overclocking setup. So you've got your overclock mode, your bus speed, etc. So you can manually change those should you wish to. Go through and change your B clock, CPU frequencies, etc. Pretty much everything on here I'm going to leave as auto. If you want to play with these yourself, you're more than welcome to. I see at the moment little point of doing a dedicated video on overclocking on this, being that pretty much all processors these days don't overclock massively, and a lot of them you don't really get a great deal of extra value out of it. So if you want to see that, then there are other channels on YouTube which will show you this. This is literally just going to be a tour to show you what settings you can change, but I'm not going to give you a great deal of advice on which settings you should change, so just wanted to get that out there. So CPU frequency and voltage, you can choose that again. So you've got options for auto and manual, so you can manually put in a frequency and a voltage. So that is probably about the only thing I would suggest that you could do on here as a kind of a pretty easy thing to do. If you run something like Ryzen Master, you can work out what your kind of stable voltages are and your stable frequencies for the particular processor. But to be honest with you, these days the motherboard and the software does a pretty good job of controlling all anyway, unless you do want that extra granular control. So other settings there, so you've got the SoC uncore voltage, which you can change, your VDDP voltage control, your VDDG CDC voltage controls. Yeah, you can see that, you can read it for yourselves, you can see what it's all about. So you've got your DRAM information, you can click on that and it will tell you what you've actually got, and it will read the JDEC programmed readings or speeds, timings, etc. And also manufacturer module size. So if you're having problems and you've got RAM which isn't playing ball, you can take a look in here and check the part numbers, make sure they all match up and make sure that they come from the same manufacturer and similar kind of production dates. Those can be problematic, so worth taking a look in there. You can as well, you can change which slot you're actually going on to as well. Also you've got load XMP, so this is the thing that most of you are going to want to have to do. So as default it comes up as auto, so it will just go to whatever your RAM's default characteristics are. If you want to enable XMP, you can click on there and load your XMP profile. It will then put in the DRAM frequencies, etc., and your DRAM voltages, and should give you much better results. You've also got your Infinity Fabric frequency and dividers. Generally I would leave this set to auto. The system will do a pretty good job of it depending on which RAM you've got. If for some reason you have specifically got a Ryzen 3000 series or 5000 series processor, you've got DDR4 3600, then you can manually set these to run at their optimum, but realistically most of the time somewhere between 1600 megahertz and somewhere down towards the kind of 1900 megahertz is going to be somewhere around that sweet spot. Generally it's half the speed of your RAM, so if you've got DDR4 3600, set it to 1800, etc, etc. But again, if you're not too sure, then leave it set to auto and the system will work those things out for you. You've got DRAM timing configuration, so if for some reason the XMP isn't picking up the speeds of your RAM effectively, so maybe it's picking up as CL18 rather than 16, you can manually put your numbers in here. So your primary, secondary and tertiary timings, etc. You've also got a fail count, so how many times it will actually fail to boot before it actually resets the BIOS. That's quite a handy one, or rather turns off XMP in the BIOS so you can get in. Yeah, and also other things you can change there. There's a ton of features for RAM that you can go into, more than what we probably got time to go through in this run through. Like power downs, all that kind of stuff. So lots of things you can tweak in there should you want to. You've got your external voltages, so you can choose your load line calibrations. It's defaulted to level 4 for CPU load line and SoC load line, so again you can change those however you see fit. There are multiple levels, again you can set it back to auto, level 1, whatever you want to do. I'm going to set them to auto, but that tells you what it's actually at the moment. You've got other voltages there being made known to you. Press escape, and then you've got overclocking profiles, of which you can store 10 profiles, which is absolutely crazy. If you want to, you can save and load profiles, so if you've had one of these boards before and you're swapping out a motherboard, if you've saved your profile you can upload it. So that's all pretty self-explanatory. So that is going to be pretty much it for OC Tweaker. So let's head over into advanced. So you've got CPU configuration, tells you about your processor, what model it is, speeds, processor family, etc, etc. You've got also support for various options here. So you've got PSS support, NX mode enabled. These are pretty much all set as standard from the factory. I'm going to turn off SVM mode, which is the virtual machine mode. More of a security thing, so potentially if there's any weird stuff going on, if you've got virtual machine turned off, then there can't be any virtualization on your machine that you may or may not be aware of. SMT is your multi-threaded mode, so if you're looking for extreme overclocking on your processor, you might want to turn off multi-threaded mode to allow the cores just to act as a single core rather than a core and 2 threads. So you've got auto or disabled. I would leave it set to auto. You've got your AMD FTPM, so if you're using the TPM on your processor, where you can choose it. You can also get it to route to the LPC, which is the add-on one, etc, etc. Or you can disable FTPM altogether, or TPM, however you want to do it, but I'm leaving it set to that for Windows 11 use, which we are currently on. So that is pretty much it for that section. Next we've got PCI configuration. So again, this is at the moment, because we're using a slightly older graphics card, we had to enable CSM, which is compatibility mode, because our graphics card doesn't fully support UEFI. So some settings on here will be different. Obviously, if you have got CSM enabled, you won't be able to use above 4G decoding, and also resizable bar support will be disabled. But there's a very strong chance that you've got CSM enabled because your graphics card isn't new enough, so those would be relevant anyway. But if you're using an older hard drive or SSD, which has been formatted in the master boot record format rather than GPT, then you may have to enable CSM, but you are going to then lose some of these extra things that your board will potentially support. So do bear that in mind when you're installing Windows, what features you want, what features you're going to use, and transferring an old drive to a new computer can actually cause a reduction in performance, so do bear that in mind, especially the resized bar, which is starting to become a little bit more efficient. Also here you've got the IOV support, so this is virtualization for devices through, if you're using SMT, this is disabled. Obviously we've got virtualization disabled anyway, so it's pointless having that enabled, but if you do want to enable virtualization through I/O, then you will need to enable that as well. Onboard devices, so this is going to be useful for some of you. This one in particular is probably going to be one that most of you will want, and that is to turn the onboard LEDs off in S5 sleep mode. So yeah, if your LEDs and USBs and all that kind of stuff are keeping you awake at night because your PC's gone to sleep but the RGBs haven't, then you can choose that. So enabled or disabled are the options there. Also, you've got the restore onboard LED defaults. So if you've set some RGB profiles on, you can reset those to the factory defaults. And also you've got RGB LED on or off. So you can basically turn the whole thing off and your PC will be a lot darker. Although if you've got RGB RAM, that will still be enabled. So do bear that in mind. If you have RGB RAM, it does still continue to be illuminated even if that is set to off. HD audio controller, so that is set to auto. You've got the option for enabled or disabled. You've also got front panel I/O, so if you've got a very old case which doesn't support HD audio, then you can choose AC97. A little bit redundant these days, I feel, but certainly might be useful. Restore on AC power loss, so this is when your power goes off, what do you want the PC to do? Do you want it to remained off, or do you want the PC to power back on? If you're using it as some kind of file server, you probably want it set to power back on, but up to you. Onboard LAN, so you can enable or disable the onboard LAN. If you're using a separate 2.5 gig card, then you may wish to disable the onboard gigabit one. Again, up to you. PS2 Y cable, this is a bit old fashioned, but you can actually plug a Y cable into the PS2 port to plug in both a keyboard and a mouse at the same time on the same ports. That can be enabled or set to auto. I'd leave it to auto because chances are you're never going to plug anything in there. Next one, storage configuration. So you've got your SATA mode, so you can set it to HCI or you can choose it to be set up as RAID. If you do set it to RAID, you will need the RAID drivers to install Windows, so do bear that in mind. Also, SATA hot plug is disabled as default, as it should be, because most systems don't support hot plug. SATA port 1 tells you what's on there, so if you've got drives plugged in, they should appear there and say they're present. And SATA M.2, we don't have any SATA M.2s because we're currently connected via NVMe, which is down here. So our Kingston SNV2 1TB drive, and you can see the size there, etc. So yeah, this can be useful for diagnosing things, especially if you've got CSM enabled or UEFI and drives are not appearing, all that kind of stuff. ACPI configuration, so this is your power management. So suspend to RAM is what we've got enabled at the moment. So that is basically S5 sleep. You can choose to have that enabled or disabled. If you want your system to completely power down when you turn it off, then set that to disabled. Currently we're set to auto. Deep sleep, again, you can choose that. So this may affect how your lights work, RGBs when the system's shut down or how quickly it resumes. So you can choose deep sleep modes. I'm leaving that as disabled. You can choose it so your PS2 keyboard will wake up from S4, S5 sleep. You've also got your PCIe devices power on, so if you've got maybe a PCI Express LAN card and it's getting a signal from a WAN or whatever, then you can do wake on LAN, that sort of stuff. RTC power on, so you can set it so that your PC will turn on from the real-time clock. And if you go into enabled, you can choose when it turns itself on. Also, you can choose from the operating system, so some operating systems will support that also. I'm going to leave that set as disabled. USB power delivery in soft off state, so this is if your keyboard and mouse have RGB LEDs, this is where you're going to want to go to enable or disable that. So if the PC is in the powered off state or S5 sleep and you want your USB power to be off, then turn that to disabled or enabled. It's not always entirely clear, it's kind of USB power deliver in soft off state. So yeah, do you want that enabled or disabled? I guess up to the individual. If you're not too sure, switch between the two and you'll see if your lights come on or whether your device is charged whilst the unit is sleeping. Next one is your trusted computing. So this is going to be mostly for Windows 11 devices. So TPM2, got version firmware 3.84. Vendor is AMD because it's built into the processor. We've got active PCR banks, which is 256-bit, and it's currently enabled. If you want to, you can disable that, but if you're using Windows 11, you'll probably have to enable it. So pending operations, none, platform, hierarchy, endorsement, etc. Yeah, all the usual stuff there, which you can go in and tweak to your heart's content. Probably best, if you're not sure what you're doing here, leave it well alone, so you may get to the point where your system just won't boot because you've messed up your security support. AMD PBS, so this is your AMD firmware version for the actual motherboard, the AGESA version, bootloaders, all that kind of stuff. You've also got graphics features. So if you have more than one graphics adapter, so say for instance you've got onboard graphics, you want to enable that as well. You can choose the primary and secondary graphics, etc. So you can choose internal graphics if you want that as your primary. So if you're using a 5600G or 3400G, something along those lines, you can use that. Or if you're using a PCI Express graphics card, then you set it to external. If you've got a G-series processor on here, you will have more options available in here, such as adding more RAM or allocating more RAM, etc. But I don't currently have one, so I cannot show you that. PCI Express graphics lane configuration, so you can set it so that your bifurcation levels are increased. So if you want to have Crossfire or something, or you've got a RAID card in your PCI Express slot at the bottom, and you want to share the bandwidth, obviously there's only a certain amount of lanes which can be shared, 16 in total, so it's up to you how you divvy them up between the various ports which are available, but for pretty much everybody, 16x on the top slot is where you're going to want to be, unless you do have a specific PCI Express RAID card or some kind of capture card, that sort of thing. So 16X for that one. NVMe RAID mode, you can choose to have that enabled or disabled, so that'll be combining your two M.2 slots. And also you've got, I actually don't even know what those are, to be honest with you. VDD-CR, VDD full mode, yes, no idea what those are for, but I'd leave them to auto. Next one is AMD overclocking. You have to accept that to allow access. So you've got manual CPU overclocking, manual iGPU overclocking, and you've got precision boost overdrive. Now, I would say for most people, I would probably avoid manual because it's, well, the system does a pretty good job of doing its own thing anyway. So ideally go into precision boost overdrive and set this to whichever you want to. You can choose advanced, so you can go and adjust the PBO limits and the scalars yourselves manually, and also the platform thermal limit for throttling, you can change that. Most people, I would feel, if you just go into it and choose either auto, which will do what it can, but without stressing the system too much, or enabled. Enabled will give you slightly higher temperatures and slightly higher clocks. Isn't always the most beneficial, so I would generally set it to auto for myself personally, but your processor may behave differently, so put in there whichever you want to. So that is the AMD overclocking. CBS, basically, this is settings for performance, so P states and all that kind of stuff you can change. Common options for your I/O, again, a lot of this stuff in here you probably never ever need to go into, apart from this one, which is the chipset common options. This is actually quite useful. So SATA configuration, you can set your SATA mode. So again, AACI RAID, which we kind of seen a little bit earlier anyway. And you've also got your aggressive SATA device sleep, which you can set. But again, I would leave those to auto. USB configuration, you can choose whichever generation you have on there. And also USB Bluetooth remote wake up. I didn't even know that was a thing, but yeah, apparently you can do that as well. Also USB ports, you can choose to enable or disable them, so depending on what you're doing. If you've actually got a device which is a real pain in the backside and you just want to disable it, then you can just disable port manually, or if you don't want people plugging in USB ports because it's a kiosk type PC, you can just disable as many ports as you want to, both internal and external. If you want to know which port is which, do head over to the manual and it'll tell you which port is port 0, 1, etc, etc. I think that's pretty much it for in there, in the advanced sections. So let's head over, oh actually, active page on entry, this might be useful to some of you. So the active page on entry, so when you go into the BIOS for the first time, you can choose where it goes to main, OC tweaker, advanced tool, hardware monitor, blah, blah, blah. So whichever you want to be your first one is the one which you choose there. So I'm going to leave it as main. And full HD UEFI BIOS, you can set it to auto or disabled. So if you, again, if you've got a monitor which doesn't support 1080p or doesn't support HD UEFI, then you can set to disabled. It will kind of try and do the older version or reduce the resolution to 1024 by 768. Set to auto, you can't go too far wrong. Next one is tools, so RGB LED. This is something some of you may want to do if you're not installing any software. So you can choose the LED mode for the onboard ports. So these are the addressable RGB ports on there and also the regular RGB ports. So if you want to turn all your RGB off, just choose off and then do apply to all channel and it will turn everything off. If you want to set it to breathe in, you can do that. You choose your specific color temperature. So if you want it to be red, just enter 255 in there and that will give you full brightness. And then you can apply to all channel and then you basically got a red flashing PC. If you want to save that, you can save the data and then that will load it in there. So whenever the system boots up, that is going to be its default kind of thing that it does. I'm going to go back and set it to rainbow. That's what we generally tend to like here. And you can choose the speed. So I'm actually going to change that to 64. And I'll leave the brightness at full and apply to all channels and save current data. And there we go. So yeah, if you want to change your settings there for RGB, you can do there. Easy RAID installer, so you can do that. If you've got a CD drive and USB, it'll basically copy the drivers for SATA RAID or NVMe RAID from the support CD and put it onto a USB stick for booting. I can't imagine many people doing that, but you never know. You can choose this tool to securely erase your SSD. Never recommended really, because it just reduces the lifespan of it. and the same for NVMe drives. You've got an option to sanitize the drive, and also instant flash. So if you go into instant flash, this is basically how to update your BIOS. You can do all that stuff in there. You will, as it says on the screen, if you're using anything like BitLocker or any forms of encryption that rely on TPM, make sure you have a backed up recovery key, or better still, go into Windows and disable encryption and BitLocker whilst you're doing this, and then turn them back on after. It does say there it is recommended to disable FTPM before updating the BIOS, as I just said. Otherwise, an unpredictable failure may occur, which is never a good thing. You get the option to continue yes or no. So I don't need to flash the BIOS, so I'm not going to do that quite now. So that is it for the tool section. Then we've got hardware monitor. Again, this is where some of you are probably going to want to look into take control of your fans, because the ASUS software is pretty poor. So you've got your CPU temperature, motherboard temperature, fan speeds, etc. And there are 4 headers in total, 1 for the CPU and 3 chassis fans. You've also got your voltages there, so if you're having problems with the system, then you can keep an eye on your voltages, make sure they're all okay. Our 12 volt there at the bottom, 5 volt and 3.3, all look pretty rock solid. So we've got 12.3 in the BIOS, we've got 5.1 and also 3.392. So those are looking pretty healthy. If for some reason you're getting problems with your system and those don't look good, or they're more than half to 1 volt out from what they should be, then possibly your PSU might be failing, or you have a slightly dodgy connection somewhere along the line. So you can check those out. If we scroll down through, you've also got your fan settings here. So if you want to, you can choose silent mode, standard mode, performance mode, or full speed. I generally like to do customize and set my own curves, which I'll show you how to do that shortly. So you've got your temperatures you can set manually and all that kind of stuff. You've also got fan configuration, so you can choose what kind of setting it is. And this is something which probably some of you are going to be experiencing. So if you go in and the BIOS or the motherboard doesn't detect your fans properly, then you may need to manually set them. So normally they'll be set to auto, and if I did that and saved it, the fans would ramp up and they'd be really incredibly noisy, because they're kind of trying to do DC mode when they're PWM. So if you've got a 3-pin fan plugged into the header, choose DC mode. If you've got a 4-pin PWM fan, choose PWM mode. And then you can go in and customize let's say all the speeds, etc. on a per fan header basis if you want to. You've also got the option wherever you can choose for water pumps and all that kind of stuff. As you can see, I've got these set to PWM, and also what they monitor as well. So you can choose, like on each individual fan, is it going to monitor the motherboard or is it going to monitor the CPU? I normally keep it to CPU because the motherboard kind of takes control of itself. So yeah, got that for all of those. Critical temperatures, etc. So yeah, that's pretty standard stuff. If we go back a level, so you can go into Fantastic, which is basically a graphical user interface of what is going on here. So you've got option for all fan setting, so all fans will do exactly the same as what is in this box here, or you can do it individually, so on a per fan basis. So our CPU fan, we can adjust the curves in this nice graphical interface. Click apply, and you reduce your fan speeds, etc. I turn that right down. That might make things quieter. Are we on fan 2? I can't remember. So yeah, it's not really changing a great deal. The graphics card in this PC is a little bit on the noisy side until it's in an afterburner, in which case it gets considerably quieter, which is awesome. But yeah, there you go. So you can change all your fan settings there, and you can obviously change whether it monitors a CPU or motherboard. Your choice entirely. You've got options again: full speed, performance, standard, or silent. Let's click apply on there, and we'll come out of there. It's pretty straightforward. You've also got fan tuning. So you go into fan tuning. It'll basically make every fan go. Well, you can hear it already. It's trying to do it already. So we'll click cancel because we didn't want it to do that. So next we're going to head into security. So in here you can set a supervisor password if you want to, or a user password. You can turn on secure boot. Now currently we've not got secure boot enabled because we've got CSM running. So we've managed to, I'm not sure why this has done this. Normally you can't install Windows 11 without secure boot being active. But I guess because we're in CSM mode because of the graphics card, etc, etc. Anyway, you get the idea. You can install default secure boot keys here if you want to. You You can clear them, you can got your key management, you can upgrade them, delete them, all that kind of stuff. And also you've got your image execution policy, which again, I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I try and stay well clear of that. Anyway, moving on to boot. So this is something you might want to look at if you've got more than one drive. If you've only got the one drive installed, then generally it will pick up the right one with Windows Boot Manager. Boot option 2 is the Kingston NVMe, which is the same drive but not Windows booting one. If that makes sense, that is how UEFI works. There's a small UEFI partition on the drive that it will look at first of all. And if you want to change between various drives, you've got options for, if you've got multiple drives, you can choose your BBS priority in this section here. Boot from onboard LAN you've got enabled, and setup prompt timeout. Fast boot you can enable or disable, and the boot up numlock full screen logo you can choose to have enabled or disabled, entirely up to you. And you've got your add-on ROM display and your CSM. So if, like I said at the very beginning, if you have a particular part of your system which isn't compatible with UEFI 100%, you will need to enable CSM compatibility support. Or if you've got a drive which was formatted MBR not GPT and you're trying to reuse it from an older system or just a different system, then you may need to enable that. So you've also got the option for enabled or disabled. So if you disable CSM, it automatically becomes UEFI and vice versa. So that's those options there. And I think that is it there. Yep. So they basically we're at the end. So you've got the options for save changes and exit, which we'll be doing shortly. Discard changes. So if you're not sure or you may have messed something up, then you can choose that. You can choose to discard changes and just start over. And also you can use this to load the UEFI BIOS default. So basically reset to default. You've also got the launch EFI shell from file system device. So this will basically try and launch from a separate device. And you've got boot override. So if you had a USB drive installed here, you could choose your USB drive, hit enter, and it will boot from that next, rather than having to change your boot order. So I think that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and save changes and exit, and we'll reboot into Windows. Okay, so we're back into Windows, everything's loaded, and yeah, it's all looking good. So there you go, there's how to go around the BIOS on your Asrock B550m Pro 4. If you've got any comments or questions, you know where to stick them in the comments section below. I think that's going to pretty much wrap it up. I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.